We'll give folks another minute. We are live, but people are onboarding, so. All right, let's kick off our discussion. The film topic for today is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Where would the group prefer to start? Just general feedback. How'd you guys like it? Nice, cozy, light, psychology-informed film.
Almost felt like there was no plot, like things were kind of just happening.
No plot. What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess like compare, like there were these scenes of kind of just like things happening that I don't know like how much they were like driving forward like the story. Like maybe they were developing character, but like I don't know. It kind of just felt like, oh, they're driving and like they go to the cemetery and then they pick up a hitchhiker and then they stop at this old house and then they try to get gas and then so. It kind of just felt like things were happening to them and they were, like, it was hard to see, like, an external force, like, applying sort of, like, this directive or narrative. Like, it kind of just felt almost, like, not aimless, but, like, not serendipitous because it's not good for them, but, like, things were just happening by chance almost to them.
Yeah, a slice of time.
Yeah.
Yep. And you know, in a similar context for the family, we don't get any resolution.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have anything guiding or governing their behavior. We don't make sense of it, which I think was intended by Tobe Hooper. I can't speak for him, but likely intended by the director, and makes this movie even more horrifying. Yeah. I think one of the parallels in psychology and psychiatry, to your point, is that, and maybe we could bring this to psychotherapy, but certainly even in general, the psychiatric evaluation. A lot of individuals struggle with depression and anxiety. And of course, we think biopsychosocially. And from a psychosocial perspective, we do tend to focus, and scientifically so, on what's going on and why you might be presenting now, right? What's the trigger? What's the precipitant? What's going on psychosocially? And how are you, when it comes to this, especially depression and anxiety, adjusting to those new psychosocial stressors? We are seeing more and more chronic depression. Right, depression when the DSM-3 was, and this might be certainly a shortfall of the APA in general, but depression was at least considered to be an episodic illness. Right, so major depressive disorder, the condition when there are recurrent major depressive episodes. It was an episodic illness, as is bipolar. We've seen a trend now with chronic depression, and not necessarily persistent depressive disorder. I don't want to talk about dysthymia or dysthymic disorder per se. Chronic depression, and you know, one of the reasons in which I think we're seeing this trend is a lack of psychotherapy that is assisting the true biopsychosocial treatment for major depressive disorder. And one of the psychotherapies that can be employed, existential therapy, is this idea that your story is not fully written. So it's not to give a pat on the back, don't worry about it, these psychosocial stressors are transient, get over it, not at all. But the perspective of your journey and your story not being fully written in a psychotherapeutic milieu is successful. For some, not everybody,
And
of
it can
course.
be empowering too, right? Of like, so you can keep writing your story, you can make changes from here on.
Right. And what a parallel in this movie, right? We can't make sense of it, just like a psychiatrist perhaps can't make sense of what's going on, or the individual, to which maybe the psychiatrist can help make sense, to continue your story, to continue your narrative. So similar to maybe the sequel, making sense of this slice of time, maybe your sequel, your next chapter, may make sense of how these psychosocial stressors played a role in you, developing professionally, interpersonally, vocationally, etc. Right? So, parallel. Sorry for the long, drawn-out soapbox, but there is a parallel here. That said, never watched the sequel. I'm true to the original here. I clearly understand and respect the role that this particular movie back in 1973 played in the horror genre. And with that respect, I couldn't get around to watching any of the sequels, even the reboots. Nope. If anybody wants to watch a sequel, I'll just turn on the 73 version yet again. No problem doing that. Other thoughts? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I felt like one thing that was interesting to me was the group dynamic, right? So you have like these two couples and then the brother who is in a wheelchair, and he felt like he didn't feel very, like, at times left out, and at times it seemed like he didn't want to go on the trip, and other times it seemed like he forced his way on this trip and it was unclear what the role is. But whereas everyone like kind of rushed into danger, he was the one who kind of got dragged into danger. And so it's interesting to me that like the one who survives is his sister, who potentially like dragged him into the situation to begin with.
Yeah, a couple of comments on that. Yeah, I completely agree. When we watch films, sometimes we get immersed in the film. Again, a psychologist or a psychiatrist might call that identification. It's that unconscious process that really makes the film then worthwhile. And especially if you're going to drop $20, $30 on a film in theaters, boy, you better get your money's worth. And if you're consciously making an effort not to identify, you're throwing your money away. And I'd be very interested for any feedback here. Who did you actually identify with? Because if it was the brother, this movie was probably even more horrifying for you for reasons that Danielle just brought up, right? It's natural to identify, usually with the protagonist, but we have our choice, and it's not a conscious choice. It's unconscious, and identification is that defense mechanism, right? And it would make this movie even more horrifying. To the extent that there's that irony at the end that the person that actually drags him into it is the one that survives the only one that survives at the end. And attending the event at the Museum of Modern Art yesterday, I had not known this, to be completely honest with you, but this is the film that did coin the term "final girl."
No.
Right. So of all things, our first ever final girl is the one that maybe has a little bit of antagonism to her protagonist character.
I did find her somewhat antagonistic. I don't know that I identified with any of them. I kind of found them all a little bit antagonistic in some ways. But for her, even like when she's being rescued at the end, like what happened to that guy who first hit, like she kind of just ditched the other guy running with her. She left him there in the road.
She did.
I was like, what?
Well, she's been through a lot. Right. I don't know if I'm ready to diagnose her with acute stress disorder, but I'm trying to give her, again, especially after I found out she was our first ever final girl, and as much as the term was coined.
What does that mean?
It's the trope where the purist in the movie, in horror movies, is the one that is most likely to end the movie alive. Right. And it gets to the different tropes, and I would strongly recommend watching The Cabin in the Woods to have a meta type of commentary on that, as does Wes Craven's Scream. Speaking of which, the first woman to get murdered in the house trying to escape, and then Leatherface runs her down right after the front porch. That is alluded to in Scream, right? That's how Casey actually dies in the opening. Spoiler alert. In the opening scene of Wes Craven's Scream. So this movie not only was inspired by real life events, which we can get into, but perhaps even more importantly, inspired other movies, and Scream is one of those.
She probably had the most gruesome death too before, because they like had her on the meat hook and everything. Everyone else kind of died instantly.
Yeah, they actually talked about that scene last night at the Q&A at the discussion panel. It's kind of cool. And she did. Yeah. She did.
I think kind of related to that, like the group dynamic on the opposite side of like the family.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't get that much insight into how these three like very odd individuals are able to function as like a family. Like we see a little bit of like them eating breakfast together, but it's a lot of like antagonistic interactions for like that last 20 to 30 minutes of them interacting between like the father and the hitchhiker. Which I feel like usually someone who has like that severe of a level of social interaction, like I don't know how you would be able to interact as a family, and like it seems like up to this point they're able to function if this is like a slice of life and it's been okay for them without any sort of like real problems.
Yeah, when first of all, when the grandfather's introduced, I thought he was taxidermied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Again, an allusion to Psycho, or at least Psycho impacting. We'll get to the third variable, the common variable, in that in a second. But I thought he was mother, but just grandfather, until I actually saw that he was alive. Right? I mean, I'm talking about the first time I saw it. And he's the patriarch, and there's dialogue from his son to his sons about how, in his day, he'd be able to painlessly end this for you within seconds. He was just one of a kind. And there was a very odd and uncomfortable dialogue from the father, really remembering his own dad in a very special way, and special in only a way that Toby Hooper can do it. Which is interesting, because even that in and of itself, to me, when I saw that scene again last night, I was just thinking that a lot of individuals, caregiver burden, struggling with parents with end-stage dementia, remember them how they are. And it's so difficult to hear them say the things that they're saying and do the things that they're doing. Ma, this is not like you. Dad, this is not you. When, of course, it isn't. And it just reminds us as caregivers, that is, as physicians, that caregiver burden is a major issue in treating people with end-stage dementia, major neurocognitive disorder, and to dismiss that is now malpractice. Right? There's significantly high rates of depression and anxiety disorders among individuals, usually the children, usually the daughters of individuals stricken with this disease. Right? Alzheimer's disease being just but one example of that. And I just saw that play out in a very sensational, dramatic way last night as I'm watching this film. 3 generations of men, incredibly antagonistic, dysfunctional to say the least. But in some weird way, it works for them. And maybe it's a similar dynamic to what we discussed this morning in catfishing. Maybe it doesn't work for them if not for visitors entering into their home and they're being able to focus on that quote-unquote common enemy, and that catfish. Again, it'd be an over-the-top, family dynamic that allows them to function only when they have a victim. Right? But again, what a metaphor.
I thought it was interesting, like he kind of alluded to his own shortcomings too, saying like he can't kill, he's like not good at it, he's like not comfortable with it. Which most of the time is a good thing. But for him, it's like how he's failed his family legacy. Like he can't fulfill the role that his father filled, so he needs his sons to do it. And it was like a very strange dynamic and like sense of failure.
It skips a generation.
Yeah, it skips a generation, but he's also like okay, still partaking in the meal afterwards.
He's the cook.
Yeah.
Right? It's not even said, you're only the cook.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, it's very odd. I was going to, something you had said actually reminded me of another teaching point to that. Because his sons now do his bidding, right? And he's probably the most dangerous person now in that family. He's kind of taking on the role of patriarch, because obviously I don't think granddad's doing all that much these days. And it's very Mansonian. Charles Manson didn't lift a finger and hurt anybody. He never physically touched any of the victims. He had his family, right? The Manson family, do his bidding for him. And when I heard that dialogue about him not being able to get, to do enough, and that he's only the cook. Reminded me of Charles Manson, and how dangerous he was despite the fact he never physically touched any of his victims. Other thoughts? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm surprised you guys didn't pick up on a topic yet. I thought the medical students would go right there. We've had multiple discussions about this, other levels of education. I kept on telling them when we get to the med student roundtable, I bet you blank is going to be discussed. So still waiting on that one. Especially when you're preparing for your shelf exam, if that's any hint. Definitely antisocial personality, and let's go with that. So, antisocial personality. Let's say they rule it for all intents and purposes. Let's say sure, okay, we're going to say antisocial personality. Before we actually are able to render that diagnosis, and especially provide medical record documentation, what else must we consider?
Well, my first thought of the hitchhiker is he on drugs?
Right. So the direct and physiologic effects of substance. Let's say the answer is no. But me too, by the way. But let's say for all intents and purposes for this discussion, now we investigate it, and there does not seem to be a role that substances play in the behavior that we observe. Right after substances, what else would we think of?
Certain medical condition.
Yeah, and what's one medical condition that we would consider given what we know about this family?
Like, not the food they're eating. Like, right? They seem to be malnourished.
Right. And on an exam, what are you thinking? What's that favorite on psych exams? Behavioral change, antisocial personality, frontal lobe predilection, cannibalism.
Oh, like on the
Prion disease, right? Yeah. Yeah. I knew the word prion was actually going to be mentioned today. Right.
Oh.
Now, it's rapidly progressive, and this family, especially the grandfather, looks like they've been around for a while, so it's probably not what we're thinking, and it's not, CJD. But boy, on a shelf exam it would be, right? Rapidly progressing personality change due to prion, which is ingested. So cannibalism. Also, the last victim, final girl, there was a final scene there where all they showed was her eyes from different perspectives, and I just thought, again, is that a metaphor for the corneal transplant? Another thing that you have to be reminded of on a shelf exam, right? Who inspired this film? Yeah. Yep. Yep. So what do we know about Ed Gein? Surely, when you realized it was inspired by a serial killer, you went and did the deep dive and spent hours last night, even though, again, the likelihood of him appearing on a shelf is modest at best. Just for light reading.
Didn't he start as like a grave robber
Yeah.
initially?
Yeah, which is interesting because that's how the movie starts, right? And that's not, okay, that's not by chance.
He was found unfit to stand trial due to psychiatric reasons.
Yeah, and I almost think I read it somewhere that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Let me see.
Yeah. I'm not really prepared to say that even the grandfather has schizophrenia. For that particular character, it would actually be difficult to say that whether he did or didn't.
Okay, so originally he was judged incompetent, but then later he was judged competent, but then he was diagnosed with chronic schizophrenia.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the teaching point there, based on the real case, is that the diagnosis in and of itself, while it may contribute to, is not directly involved in whether an individual is competent to stand trial.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The bottom line is whether or not they understood what they were doing when they did whatever they had done or whatever act they had committed. Now again, if the answer is yes or no, certainly the why is going to be helpful to support that. And here that why, the reasons for, in this case, initially anyway, he didn't understand what he was doing during those crimes. Appears to have been due to schizophrenia, at least per one physician's report. Again, I don't know if I'll take that. And, while inspired by Ed Gein, not really sure if any of our characters in the film demonstrate schizophrenia. I didn't really appreciate that there was hallucinations. We could talk a little bit about delusions, and that's a gray area for me here. But not really sure if this family has schizophrenia.
Yeah, the closest we get is like a look at the hitchhiker when he's in the van, and he's just like very disorganized.
He is very disorganized.
Like his affect is all over the place, but there's no evidence of like hallucinations or delusions.
Yeah, if we got the reason why they were cannibals, I'm sure we might go down the path to investigating whether that was a delusion. Does it keep? Do you think it keeps them immortal?
Yeah.
Right. But schizophrenia would definitely be in a differential. We heard a couple of positive symptoms, right? We heard that is those symptoms that, when present, are the pathological presence of something that at baseline should not be there. Delusions, hallucinations / perceptual disturbances, disorganized or catatonic behavior, disorganized speech or thought process, right? Then negative symptoms, the absence of something that at baseline should be there. Again, just to prime you for your shelf exam. The individual requires 2 from that list to begin to rule in for schizophrenia, and then you're looking at progression, 6 months or more, and this does appear to be going on for more than 6 months. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that in the beginning of this movie, I think when the initial couple is going towards that house, they finally come upon a generator. It's a red generator, and on that generator is written the word Wisconsin, and I can't help but think that was an allusion to the Wisconsin butcher, Ed Gein. So during the Q&A, I tried to ask that question, but they cut us off. The Q&A ended a little shorter than I think initially intended, and we never got that question answered.
You did Q&A with the director?
The director's passed on, but there was the cinematographer, there was another person from production, and then the entire cast, with the exception of one character. I think Sally wasn't there, but otherwise everybody was there. Yep.
Sort of a side note about Gein, I just found this on his Wikipedia page, but it said that after his mother's death, he made a woman's suit so that he could become his mother, which is something that we saw with like Leatherface, like dressing in like women's clothing, like shirt.
Or Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, Buffalo Bill. So, in Silence of the Lambs was directly inspired by the case of Ed Gein as well, as was Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. So, and again, in all cases, we have people who are in a suit, making a human suit, all inspired by Ed Gein. That's Buffalo Bill from the Silence of the Lambs, of course, Leatherface in our movie, and then Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Norman Bates. He doesn't make the leather suit, but he does stuff his mom, right? He does taxidermy his mom to keep her alive.
I felt like the choice of weapons was interesting. Like they didn't, they could have used like guns. It's Texas. They could have used guns. They could have used like things that were quicker, faster. And they kind of allude to this when they're talking about meat, right, in the van, of like, hitting them over the head, like gives more people jobs, like, it's better for the economy, basically. But it was interesting, because you can outrun a chainsaw, you can outrun a hammer.
Only if you're a final girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they do allude to that. And again, I think it really sets the tone of cannibalism and humans being treated like animals, and which one, chainsaw versus the bolt, would be more humane?
Well, the other thing is a lot of research that like stabbing someone takes more of you than like shooting someone. Like there's a detachment when you shoot someone versus when you're committing a murder through like stabbing. It requires like more psychological distress and like aggression, I guess you could say.
Yeah, there is some correlation between physical distance and emotional distance, and individuals who will commit these acts with both a physical and emotional distance are sometimes referred to as psychopaths. The individual who does it from both a physical and emotional distance that is shorter, narrower, maybe sociopath, right? In that there's some empathy and there's some feeling to it that, again, the physical and emotional distance obviously absolves you of.
It's almost like you're getting something out of it, and I'd be curious about what they're getting out of it, being that close and seeing their victims dying.
Yep.
Like, is there some kind of connection they don't have with others because they're so isolated?
Yeah. Right. Yep. And that I know that there was a guest this morning about The Hills Have Eyes, which again is a film that's going to give you a very similar feel to this one. And in that, there's so much social isolation that they booby trap the highway to ensure visitors. Right? So again, a little creative / pathological way to make sure that social isolation doesn't, become abject. What other characters you want to discuss here?
Staying on the hitchhiker, he displays an SSI, but it doesn't seem like it's typical non-suicidal self-injury because he's laughing through the whole process, and like it doesn't seem like he's doing it to release pain or to feel something. It seems like kind of related to what you just said, like because then he cuts Franklin, right? So he's trying to feel like kinship almost. I don't know. I didn't know what to make of that.
I agree with that. It seems like I feel like I'd say it was for shock value, but I don't think it was for shock. I think he was like trying to connect with the people in the car.
Yeah.
And like that's how he connects by cutting and destroying people.
Yeah, and along those lines, maybe some symbolism where he cuts is usually where you make your blood pact with your friends. It wasn't like he cut the wrist or the forearm, right? It's the palm where you shake your hand, you make a blood pact among friends. So there might be something to that.
His presentation was interesting. I'm wondering if he had like a neurodevelopmental issue in addition to everything else, like just because his communication, like social skills were so poor.
Yeah.
But it could be due to the isolation as well.
Yeah, the theme of isolation is clear here. Yeah. Any other thoughts about either Ed Gein? Anyone who's seen Psycho or The Silence of the Lambs have any comments or thoughts related to any or all of the above?
Well, I think similar to this film, like the ones who had the worst, or like the most focus were the females. Gein picked them for both females. He's his confirmed victim for both females. Silence of the Lamb is also killing females. And so I think there's like a little bit of some gender, like, dysphoria in both as well. And so there's gender dysphoria for the family, like what's alluded to.
Yeah, I mean, there are reports, and in full disclosure and a disclaimer, I've never examined Ed Gein, but in terms of what I've read and what's been published, his relationship with his mother was over enmeshed. She was very stern, domineering, described as domineering. And after he killed her, he continued to symbolically kill her through his serial killings. There's no chance or discussion as to why he didn't prey on men. Right. This was all about his mother, which again strongly inspired Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Norman Bates' incredible enmeshed relationship with his mother, even after her death. And I've never watched the sequel here, so I'm going to actually ask if anybody knows this. Because having said that, one sequel that I think I might actually reconsider and watch when it comes to this particular movie, this particular franchise, would be the prequel. Because Mom is not in this movie, and I just wonder, again, I think the unknown makes it that much more interesting to discuss, because the matriarch in this movie likely did have the same outcome and fate as Ed Gein's mother, and that's probably well enough, but to see that might actually be interesting in terms of a sequel.
To
Or in this
see
case,
the child abuse as well. To what extent.
right. Yep. And then which son? What's interesting here is that in both Psycho as well as Ed Gein's True Case, dad and brother mysteriously die. Right? And here, dad and brother are actually alive. So the same exact characters, only living, which is a nice little twist. Other thoughts? A couple of other quick snippets. Again, if you want to go off on a tangent and discuss these movies, if you've seen them, as the two are actually going through the wooded area towards the house, one of them says there's a light to find the house, and they actually find the house. I just found that, again, after coming from a vehicle that was broken down, that is right out of, I mean, that's Rocky Horror, right? Now, again, I think also 1973 in terms of the film, so I have to double check which one actually came first.
I think so because, I 75.
So,
The film,
okay.
But
The film.
Yeah, the film.
Yeah, gotcha.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. The only other thing I thought of as well, just to make things very consistent, is in the very beginning, and I did not remember this, and it's been a while since I've actually watched this movie, a lot of horoscope and astrology in the beginning,
Yeah.
right, which was interesting. And then one of the things that was mentioned not once but twice was that Saturn was in retrograde. Any relevance in terms of maybe foreshadowing there?
I mean, I think generally there's a lot of foreshadowing with like Franklin's horoscope that was like, you're gonna meet someone who's gonna end badly, or it's gonna be like a bad vacation.
Yeah, horoscope was
Like,
right
pretty
on. Right on.
direct.
Right on. Who is Saturn? Who's the planet named after?
God of Death? No, it's Pluto.
Saturn's symbol is a scythe, a sickle.
Which I think was actually, wasn't that the blood on the van?
Is that what he was trying to draw? I couldn't figure out that way.
Me either, but now it makes sense.
Comparable to meat hook.
The Titan Cronus?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. So who was he?
You want to eat his children?
Yeah. Yeah. The element of cannibalism was introduced right there. Saturn devoured his children so that he could avoid the prophecy that his oldest or his children were going to rise up and dethrone him as king of the universe, right? All right. Any final thoughts? Any other observations? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We're good. All right, guys, we'll leave it here.
Thank you.